You're listening to the latest dose of Bipolar Recorder. This podcast may cause dizziness and blurred vision. Enjoy.
Hey, this is Hunter Keegan. You're listening to Bipolar Recorder. This episode was so much fun to record. I had a guest come on, and the conversation just went in so many different directions than I was expecting, and it was a real fun time to record. But also, we discussed some very intense subject matter regarding mania, depression, hospitalization, and really everything in between. So without further ado, here we go.
All right. My name is Hunter Keegan, and I'm joined this evening by Jeff, who is a guy who I know through a local bipolar support group. And Jeff, if you would like to take a moment just to introduce yourself, maybe share your diagnosis, share anything that's on your mind, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, Hunter. Thanks for having me on the show. Again, my name is Jeff. I have bipolar disorder 1, ADHD, and I got hit in the head a while back and have a little bit of brain damage in one of my temporal lobes, as well as a complex PTSD diagnosis that sort of goes along with the territory, having been hospitalized before.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's those are definitely some pretty complicated conditions to be living with. When you say that there was PTSD from hospitalization, was that an experience in the hospital that didn't gel with you, or was it? Could you tell us a little more about that?
Sure, glad to. So when I was first diagnosed in 2003, I was 21. I was basically taking too much Lexapro. My doctor prescribed Lexapro for depression and then kept on doubling the dosage when I would report that I was still depressed, but didn't really identify the other symptoms that I reported or anecdotes as concerning. So the dosage kept on going up, and my brain kept on just revving out, and I would crash and get narcoleptic, really dramatic, and so on. But ultimately, when I was hospitalized, I had so much of this medicine in my system that I was they called it florid mania when I got hospitalized. But when I got into
I'm sorry, what type of mania did they call it?
They called it florid, like it was like extreme, meaning like
florid
it was very
mania.
Colorful how expressive I was being and how excited I was.
Okay.
And that's what the EMS and the ambulance. This is a long story. I can get into.
Oh no, hey man, we've got as much time as you want, so feel free to dive in.
Well, so yeah, I originally went to my doctor, my general practitioner, for because I was depressed. It was caused by some family trauma. Basically, my dad's health was always weighed on me growing up, and this is about time in freshman year, sophomore year of college now. And he had a quadruple heart attack with a bypass. I'm sorry, he had a heart attack with a quadruple bypass. And they weren't sure if he was gonna make it. So it really weighed on me because I had stayed in Richmond where I went to school instead of coming home to care for him. And I felt guilty that he wasn't going to make it now, and I didn't get to spend as much time as I wanted to with my dad that I didn't grow up with. So that took a lot out of me. My dad had ended up recovering. And then we lost a cousin in the Pentagon in September 11th, and it just seemed like my world was just crashing, and I wasn't able to focus in school. I was having a really hard time. So I went to my GP. He prescribed Wellbutrin. It made me anxious and irritable. So I stopped taking it. And then he changed the prescription to Lexapro, suggested therapy. But the Lexapro didn't take at first. I didn't notice any benefits. So he suggested that he sent me along to a specialist who then increased the dosage from 5 to 10 milligrams, and then eventually from 10 to 15, and then 15 to 20 over the next year and a half. So that would have been about the fall of 2001. And then by the winter of 2002 and three, I was out of control. I was really manic, and I had the periods of depression and mania before this, but I would spend a lot of money. I was hypersexual, though not that promiscuous. I had a girlfriend at the time, and what else would I do? I just would have surges of energy and creativity. And I was really, really big into photography at the time, so I would take some really cool pictures. I wrote, copious blog posts on everything that just was going on in my mind. And yeah, it was just a really interesting time. At the same time as well, now I know that I was sick, was also like kind of like a fun ride at times when it wasn't at the peaks. But
Hmm.
eventually, after myriad other stories I could get into, I got chased around Richmond, and um, while my girlfriend tried to get my parents to come down because she could tell I wasn't well, the mania had basically crossed over into psychosis, is what really happened.
Well,
And it
and
wasn't,
so just I'm so sorry, but just to jump in for a second, but do you believe that the Lexapro is what triggered the mania? Because
yeah,
a
for
lot
sure.
of times, yeah, and just so for our audience, sometimes antidepressants, for people who have bipolar disorder, just taking an antidepressant alone can trigger manic symptoms, which is why for people who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, they tend to be on an antidepressant as well as often a mood stabilizer and antipsychotic medication. So because you didn't have the mood stabilizer or the antipsychotic, the Lexapro was actually working against you and making your
Hmm.
symptoms worse, correct?
Yep, that's right, Hunter. Thanks for slowing me down. Yeah,
It's okay.
Lexapro is an SSRI antidepressant, right? It's like was it selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor? So it's like it increases the volume of serotonin available to your brain, which is something that is the neurotransmitter that helps with wakefulness and alertness. And when you're depressed and lethargic and unmotivated, more serotonin I think is ideal. That's what they prescribe it for, is to help you snap out of it, right? So the problem is that if you have a brain like mine and you get too much serotonin, it just sends you through the roof, and you, instead of getting out of the depression that you were in, you get exuberant, and um, you know you experience jubilee and fascination over things that are perhaps really not all that are mundane. For me, I start to see patterns and connections between things and people and topics, and that's when I know that my mind is playing tricks on me now, because I start to see things not that aren't there. I'm not hallucinating, but everything has more significance. And well, some things have much more significance than they are really do, and and then I start to see patterns and connections between them that that set off like signals in my mind, and
Hmm.
guide me. And it's sometimes they're the fixations on these things are very are fruitful. They lead to creative processes. They output cool bodies of work, or blog posts, a website, an app design, an essay. Um, they're fun rides, and and that's the thing about mania. It's kind of perplexing because it's like, who's going to complain
Yeah.
about being super happy or too happy?
And that's
But
kind of like at that hypomanic stage too, where things are still fairly under control. You've got that
yeah,
elevated mood, you feel more creative, more talkative, more productive. But in a lot of cases, it doesn't necessarily like impede your social or occupational or life functioning, and it almost enhances it in some ways. So this was
that's right.
almost like a hypomania. Then after that, did it lead to full bore mania?
So this was mania for me. The hypomania, I don't experience the patterns and connections as much. And hypomania for me, I talk faster. My cognition is accelerated. Um, I'm more, it comes across that I'm more like magnetic socially, so I have more charisma, and more passionate. as a partner and as a friend and everything really. It just you live more intensely. But when it crosses over into mania is when I start to see the connections and things have more significance in there than they really do. It's a blurry line, but that's where I start to know that I'm disassociating with reality, when I'm starting to lose my grip on reality, because I'm seeing things and assigning value and meaning to stuff that really isn't necessarily all that meaningful. But
Right. Kind of
yeah.
connecting dots that aren't there, right?
Mhm.
I can actually relate to that a ton. Like everything you just said really resonated with me. During my first manic episode, I was driving, it was in the middle of a road trip that I was on by myself. And I was driving down the highway through Georgia. I had been driving for hours and hours, and I had just been thinking about all these different things and all these different unrelated thoughts because my mind was racing. And then all of a sudden, there was like this like aha moment where everything seemed to coalesce into a perfect vision. I saw how all of the different ideas were apparently related. And it was like this really trippy feeling. Like it was almost like a spiritual feeling in a way, finding those connections and thinking that there's connections there when in reality, I'm trying to think of like an example, but it would be like, oh, the last car I just passed was red. Red is the state bird, the red cardinal of Virginia.
Exactly.
Therefore, blah, 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 blah. And it kind of just keeps spiraling out from that point.
It's like you're following your thought process through. It's like you're following or riding a neural network in your brain. You know, like the memories are connected by something in common, a shared context of some sort. Like you said, it's a cardinal, so it's red, and that's the state bird of Virginia, and this car's red, or the sign's red, and you start to see all these connections or following a thread. At least I do.
Mm-hmm.
That usually doesn't end up making sense,
Yeah.
but it can be fun to like to pull the thread a little bit and see what happens.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I told you all that context because I wanted to tell you what happened in the hospital, because you asked a good question about where the PTSD diagnosis came from. It
Right.
came much later in life than this. Um, but when they finally caught up to me, they I walked into an ambulance and the EMS was trying to calm me down, so they injected me with Haldol, which is an antipsychotic, first generation antipsychotic that they give people to sedate them. And um, the challenge is with these antipsychotics, more so with the first generation of them, not the second generation, which they describe as atypical antipsychotics. This first generation, there's a side effect of giving someone this medicine that can make them have twitches, and even go into not just twitches like in your face or your eyelids or your tongue, but maybe even your muscle spasms throughout your body. And it can leave you contorted, and you can get stuck in um, this state where you twitch. And
Mm-hmm.
I unfortunately got sent into like a convulsing version of this like a very intense, I should say, version of this experience. And so my when they tried to inject me with this stuff in my arm, it didn't take at first, and they didn't see what they expected, so they injected me again and again. And
Mm.
then I went into like a very intense twitching experience where my whole body was spasming, and
Wow.
I couldn't articulate anything. My tongue was just writhing in my mouth, and my chin was stuck to my chest. So this was in the ambulance on the way to the hospital in Richmond at MCV. And yeah, I remember getting to the ER, and I was strapped to a gurney. And I remember they took me off the gurney, and basically I felt, I was fighting for my life, fighting my body for my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up having an exchange with two orderlies, two state police, and two city cops,
Okay.
trying to avoid getting into a straitjacket. And
Right.
that lasted like 3 seconds before I was quartered to a bed. And I spent the night
So
there twitching overnight like that because they couldn't give me any more medicine.
Got you. Well, that's crazy. Sounds a little familiar to me. I have unfortunately also had some hospitalization experiences where police were involved. I wanted to ask you, why originally was EMS called? Was there like an incident where someone called the police and paramedics on you? What, do you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Yeah, I can share a little. So it was just that I jumped out of a moving car.
Okay.
I felt like I was being taken. My family came to come get me, scoop me up because my girlfriend was concerned about me, and she called my parents down from 2 hours away. So when they came, I felt like I was being contained or trapped, um, at this restaurant that we met at, and then they took me. They were going to take me home to my apartment in their car, but I felt like I was not in control and that I was being. I felt distrustful of my family, so I jumped out of the car and was running around in traffic. And at that point, I think someone called the police, and
Hmm.
they were trying to find me. But I would, I earlier than that summer, I would get on top of the buildings, the office buildings, the college office buildings or lecture buildings,
Okay.
to take
So you
pictures.
were in college at the time?
Yeah, that's right. I was in college. So I would
Okay.
I would get on top of these lecture buildings to take pictures of the sunset and sunrise. So for hours they couldn't find me because I was watching them scramble around the courtyard looking for me on the floor, on the ground. But eventually I just surrendered and came down and walked to the ambulance. Actually, I remember waiting for them to find me in the courtyard of this one lecture building while I started to take my clothes off. And that's something that happens a lot with people that go through this sort of experience. It's like a spiritual emergency, they call it sometimes in the book, the DSM. Um, when you have a this kind of crisis, you feel like you need to shed your skin or shed your clothes or somehow like molt. And
Hmm.
so that's the experience that I had. And then when that happened, I think someone else may have called the police because I was taking my shirt off, which is a strange
Right.
thing to see someone do.
Right.
And then I remember the police officer was very kind and he walked me to the ambulance, and that's where the injection started. Um, yeah.
Okay.
So I
So,
spent 2 weeks in the hospital then.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So you'd had this like pretty wild experience on the college campus. Police and paramedics were called. They brought you to the hospital. They fucked
Hmm.
up by giving you too much of the medication, which just made things worse. Um, and so at that point, you were held for 2 weeks. Was that under a court order of some kind, or?
It was, yeah. I woke up
Yeah.
in the next morning, I think, in the psych ward, and I woke up strapped to the bed, and they had like I was in some sort of IV drip, and I remember like as I play it back in my mind now, I can feel the nurse over my left shoulder doing something, which I perceive as like to give me something to make me alert enough for me to see that there was like officials in the room,
Hmm.
and I had a representative who was speaking on my behalf because I couldn't speak. But I remember that it was who turns out to have been a judge say that I was going to be in this hospital for up to 180 days or until I took the medicine, or else I'd be
Wow.
further institutionalized.
Wow. That is some
Pretty
crazy
scary.
shit. Yeah, that's extremely scary. So what was going through your mind at that point? Were you
Just
like, I'm just gonna take this medicine so I can get out of here? That would have been
there's just
my personal
panic.
reaction.
Just panic. I mean, imagine taking the medicine as your doctor prescribes, wake up, and then this whole escapade happens, and now your freedom's been taken away. I was absolute
Right.
sheer panic. So
Absolutely.
I started to get upset, and then I remember falling back asleep. So I assumed they turned the other drip back on.
Hmm.
But then I woke
By
up
the
the next day. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, by the way, think of how for people, and just so you know, Jeff, I have had a similar experience to the one that you're describing, and something
Hmm.
that always stands out to me when I think back on it is how unethical and strange it is that
Hmm.
someone cannot even be deemed to be mentally coherent or lucid, and yet you're still having to appear before judges and court
Hmm.
officials and all these different specialists and things like that. It really feels as if you have no agency or
Hmm.
control over the situation. And for me personally, that was one of the most terrifying aspects of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that was a very intense example of a manic episode. Is that your only full manic episode that you've had, or were you
Oh
able
no,
to? Oh,
I've had
okay.
plenty. I've had plenty
Okay.
over the years. Some of them induced by. Well, now I understand I have a caffeine dependence. But I didn't realize that for almost 2 decades. It's just embarrassing. I didn't have that awareness. But yeah, some having too much Coca-Cola. That's one of the things that incites a hypomanic episode in me. I sometimes smoke marijuana, but
Hmm.
I don't. Fortunately, I have cut that habit up dramatically. And that when I was younger, I used to experience what I. It's kind of similar to hypomania, having a weed high. Um,
Hmm.
it's somewhat similar. You get similar stimulation, and I get really creative depending on the strain.
Yeah.
But now that I'm older, it doesn't affect me the same way. Probably because I'm on more medicine. Um, but it's something that I do long for, like I used to experience it when I was younger. So
Yeah.
the marijuana and the caffeine sometimes contribute to it, but more often than that is when I don't sleep. Sleep is the biggest indicator, or I don't know what the catalyst for a hypomanic episode for me. If I sleep less than 5 hours, guaranteed I'm going to be hypomanic the next day.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
100% guaranteed. Which basically means I'm going to wake up moving about like 1.5 speed. Everything is urgent. I'm talking fast. I'm thinking fast. It's a rush of ideas. A lot of them, so some of them brilliant.
Hmm.
But all of them infatuating. Like they're all fascinating, and to me anyway. Um,
Yeah.
and that's just the nature of hypomania for me. I get impulsive and so on. But
Right. So
sleep and
I oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to cut you off. I was just going to say that sleep disruptions are also a big indicator for me.
mhm,
When I feel that hypomania coming on, it's like I sleep like 3 hours or less a night,
yeah,
and I wake up just feeling totally energized and like ready to go. And that's not a good
yeah.
sign.
I know it sucks too because you feel so good, but you know that it's a precursor for feeling out of control. And that's the worst part about it is like having a hypomanic episode when it doesn't graduate into mania. It's like a gift. It's
Mm,
actually kind of nice, so long as it's not out of control. But then when you know that what's going to happen is it's going to go out of control or it's going to disrupt what your plan was for the week or day, you're like I sometimes get like, oh, not again, here we go again, it's just another ride,
hmm.
and like I'm not really
Yeah.
into this right now. you know
Hello,
I would prefer to
darkness,
be
my old
sleeping.
friend.
Exactly. So now I know how important, well, I've known how important sleep was since I got discharged shortly after when I finally came down. They always discharged me too early. That's the one thing. But
So this
yeah, but
the incident where you were in there for 2 weeks, that was back in like what,
mhm.
like 2002,
Yeah, 2003.
2003. Okay. So were you ever hospitalized since then, or have
Oh
you
yeah,
been
several
able to keep?
times.
Oh wow.
Several
Okay.
times. And it's always because of a medication problem. Like
Okay.
it's always a medication. And it's like, they need to make tweaks in my medication regimen, um, to help control the condition as it evolves and as I get older. But sometimes they make mistakes. So I remember one time in 2012, I believe, yeah, 12, um, I I had a oral surgery. No, I had a sinus infection. Two different times, I guess, this happened, right? In 2012. I had a sinus
Hmm.
infection, and they gave me a antibiotic that was penicillin based, which I wasn't allergic to. It's called Augmentin, um, and I think, and it started to cause me to disassociate. So
Hmm.
I started to lose my grip on reality then. And then later, I got oral surgery. I had a tooth taken out or something like this, and they gave me an antibiotic, and I started to experience similar effects. And so I knew after having it the first time, I was like, oh, I have to be careful now. I can't work like this. But that was another hospitalization. I remember, I mean, that was kind of embarrassing, but yeah, you know, the EMS was called and they took me in.
Yeah.
My
Yeah, and I mean, for the audience, I mean, let's be clear. Like, you're a successful guy, right? I mean, you're very intelligent. I know that
yeah, thanks.
you work a steady job that is
Yeah,
not easy. I don't know how much detail you want to get into about
yeah. I
that,
work in tech.
but
I work in
yeah.
tech. I'm a product manager, so I usually lead mobile app teams. So yeah, I have a very stressful job, and I think it's rare too to have a leadership role and have this sort of condition inside of you know, corporate America. So I
Yeah.
recognize that that's something that I take on more stress than I think I should, frankly, and it's something I grapple with all the time.
hmm I
Um,
I can relate to that too.
yeah, yeah. But I've been hospitalized since another uh, like 10 years later, whatever it was, 7 years later. I decided to come off my medicine because
Okay.
I was smoking way too much weed, and I had been prescribed Lexapro again because I was severely depressed. This is after my father was dying. My mom had breast cancer. Getting managed at work. A bunch of stuff was going on, and so I got on the antidepressant again because we know it works. And I got on a low dose, but I was also smoking a lot of weed at the time and self-medicating, and
hmm
it made me really paranoid. And the mania was really intense. And it got out of control to the point where I was distrustful of everyone, including my doctors. So I decided
hmm
that the medications were not helping, and I was self medicated with weed better than I was with the medications, which, you know, the reality
Okay.
was probably wasn't instinctually accurate. Um, you know, there's some effect that marijuana has. It's has an anticonvulsant and sort of sedating effect or numbing effect for me. So they give you anticonvulsant, anti-seizure medicine when you have this condition. They call it a mood stabilizer sometimes. So I take a pill called Lamictal or Lamotrigine
hmm
that they usually prescribe to people who are epileptic. And
Yeah.
similarly, they give marijuana to people who are epileptic. So there's some common thread there that works. But
We're
the
not
challenges with
doctors,
marijuana,
but
yeah, we know what they tell us.
you've
Yeah, so
observed that correlation is what you're saying.
100%. There's something there, but the challenge with marijuana is it's not a you can't get enough supply of the same strain, so the condition
Yeah.
the effects of it vary dramatically. But anyway, I got hospitalized because once I came off the medicine, I was fine for a while. But then I went to a new doctor, got my brain scan. They found that I had a traumatic brain injury, or they called it an abnormal brain scan from a car
Mm,
accident years earlier. Actually,
wow.
yeah. Anyway, so I got rear-ended on the toll road and hit my head, rear-ended by a truck and hit my head on the roof of my car, ceiling of my car, and I hit the roll bar, so it just put a hole in the top of my brain. And
Wow.
yeah, uh, I went to the ER, and the doctor then told me, "Go home, you're fine." So I never
Mm,
got any sort of medication or like treatment for that.
yeah.
Um, and it's because probably the medicine that I was on was masking the symptoms of it. But at that point, when that happened, I started smoking more weed,
hmm
and irritability started to take over too. So it definitely had an effect on me that wasn't really assessed until a full 3 years later. That was 2015 was the accident. 2018 when I got my brain scanned, and that doctor that scanned my brain at a very popular clinic whose name I won't mention, she made a mistake. And I had told her all my medication history and told her, you know, that I'd been taking Abilify, this atypical antipsychotic. And she didn't, she changed my anticonvulsant from Lamictal to Trileptal, or oxycarbazepine is the generic.
Okay.
So she replaced my anticonvulsant. She told me that based on this DNA swab test, this gene site test, my DNA was contraindicated for the medication that I had been on, both
Mm,
Lamictal and Abilify. So she said, here, you should take this one instead, Trileptal instead of that Lamictal. And you should use these vitamins to self-regulate. And, you know, see how it goes. Let me know. And it's very dangerous to take someone who takes an antipsychotic off of their medication
yeah.
because quite literally it will cause psychosis. So that's what happened. And unfortunately, the same thing that happened with Lexapro happened again, where this time it wasn't the same doctor who was increasing the dosage, but when I would get when they'd come find me somewhere, in my neighborhood, or someone would call because this guy's clearly not doing well or behaving erratically,
Right.
they'd bring me in and then they would increase the dose of trileptal. But it wasn't that I wasn't taking the medication; it was that the medication was bad for me, and that's one
Hmm.
of the just tragic things about this condition is the
Absolutely.
medication needs to be monitored so closely, and you have to really fine tune this and figure out exactly right dosages that work for you and the balance, and you have to maintain the regimen or else it can all fall apart, especially if you leave it to people that don't know you, other doctors, to
Mm.
mess with. So, and they would rather just over medicate you rather than trust your word for what you're supposed to be on. It's a whole
And
other
you
thing.
had been in this, you basically, from the timeline that you've established, you're saying that these medication issues have been ongoing for like 2 decades at this point, right? Where 2003, you said, was the initial manic episode where you were put on medication, and even years after that, they're still trying to figure out like what's the best cocktail of medication for you.
Yeah, so I should go. Maybe it'd be helpful to like describe what I take. But I
Okay.
took most of this medication for most of my adult life. Um, but the challenge is when a different doctor takes over, at least this doctor, when she took over, she was skeptical of my diagnoses, but she also wasn't seeing me stable. And when I
Hmm.
came to her, I had been self-medicating with marijuana. I was going through an extreme amount of stress. Like everyone was like, "How are you still standing after losing your dad, getting divorced, losing your job? Mom's got cancer, heart attacks in your family, like a car accident." It was just one thing after another. So I was really overwhelmed at the time. And that's not usually my condition, my state. So when I came to her, I was really just not myself, not well. And things were so stressful in my life. But then also, I hadn't been on my medication, so she took me from scratch and tried to rebuild me. And so that's where the mistake was made.
Hmm.
But the other incidents where I dealt with just disassociating were caused by other medications that I needed to take for, a virus or not an infection or
Yeah,
preemptive antibiotics. And
that's
that's the
so
other thing. It
interesting.
makes me more
I've
sensitive to other medications.
you're like the first person I think I've spoken to who's said that you've had something triggered like that by an antibiotic or something. I wasn't even aware that that was possible. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, they described it as dehydration is what they said officially, but I'm like, nah, it ain't
Yeah.
even like that. Like I know exactly what caused it because it happened again. So
I feel like there were a couple of times when I tried to voluntarily go into a hospital, and that I
mhm,
was always diagnosed with dehydration, like severe
yeah,
dehydration that's making them act weird. And then they would put me on I guess just an IV with water in it, and eventually, after a couple of hours, I would get pretty bored of waiting around for an actual evaluation, and I would just sign myself out.
yeah,
So that worked a couple of times. And then eventually, I did get into a situation where I was detained by police. So
yeah,
um, yeah, it gets pretty intense. But that's really interesting about the antibiotics and these other like things that you wouldn't expect that could contribute to bipolar symptoms.
yeah. Yeah, it's more than it's over my head, it's above my pay grade or whatever. I try to keep up with I try to understand and interpret what the doctors are saying to me and I ask questions about it. To the point I think where they think I'm a bit of a headache, like my current neuropsychiatrist doesn't think.
Hmm.
Um, but you have to take ownership of this stuff because if you don't, what I have seen is that they either get over medicated into just oblivion and dysfunction, um, or you'll get what I call medically poisoned. I don't see how there's
Yeah.
any other way to look at it. And they love to just not take responsibility for what they do with the medications because you're the one putting it in your mouth, right? And it's your
Hmm.
fault that you're dehydrated, quote unquote.
Quote
It's just
unquote
like,
dehydrated.
yeah, it's like, well, if the medicine made me feel better, then I wouldn't need to find some other way to calm myself down, right? But if the
Yeah.
medication is making me worse, then what am I supposed to do? Just keep taking the medication? Like at some point, you have to have some audience for the fact that you're self-reporting that you're not well, and they're so reluctant to trust a patient. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, you have to self-advocate so hard sometimes to get psychiatrists to listen to you, because they think they know everything. I've worked
Mm,
with probably 4 or 5 psychiatrists in the last few years. Just for various reasons, I have to switch psychiatrists because of like insurance changes
mm,
and things like that. But it's like every one of them wants to like get their hands into whatever I'm taking. Like if I'm on stuff that makes me feel stable and good, for some reason there's a doctor, a psychiatrist will say, oh well, I think you should try this. Like yeah, you're currently on Lamictal, but let's put you back on lithium. And I'm like,
mm,
no, because
mm.
lithium gives me terrible side effects and I hate it. And then
Yeah.
the response is, well, lithium is a really good drug. Are you
Oh yeah,
sure?
they love to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, lithium is like the most widely studied mood stabilizer out there. And it's like, yeah, I know, asshole, but what I'm saying is
Yeah.
no.
You
Like,
don't get to put it in my body. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, like, come on. So yeah, that self-advocacy is huge when you're working with doctors. I had a conversation with someone else for this podcast recently, and she was saying the same thing. So yeah, kind of standing up for yourself, making sure that you're your own advocate, making sure you're communicating. And I mean, for me personally, I feel like I can't be 100% transparent with any psychiatrist because I get worried about them overreacting or wanting to make
Mm,
radical changes to my medication or recommending that I go in for inpatient treatment or
mm,
things like that. So it's like this really weird, complicated balancing act of I want to make sure that I'm well. I want to make sure I'm taking the right medications. But at the same time, I'm not going to trust any single or every single piece of information that gets provided to me by the psychiatrist. So, where does that leave you? I mean, it leads
yeah.
to years and years of trying to find effective regimens of medication to be on. And it feels
Hmm.
like at times it's constantly changing. Like I
Yeah.
think the longest I've been on a single cocktail of medication without any changes being made to it is maybe 1 year, I would say.
Mm.
Yeah, which I don't know. Does that sound like a long time or a short time to you?
That's a short. I mean, I was lucky to find what worked for me pretty quickly, within a couple of years. So I think that's a short time in my life. I've been on the same medication in slightly different doses for, let's see, 2007 to 18. So that would have been 11 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you were still having some issues with hospitalization and mania during those times too, right? So,
Yeah, I still have issues. I mean, I still experience minor or mild fluctuations. Like, even though you're on the medication, doesn't mean that the fluctuations go away.
right,
Um, but the hospitalizations were caused by other medications I took for other you know
right,
sicknesses, not by
right.
the medications for bipolar disorder. Those have been really reliable for me.
Hmm.
I take Lamictal, I take Abilify. I should say I have taken Lamictal, Abilify, and Vyvanse for the majority of my adult life.
Hmm.
I also now take Seroquel, which is another atypical antipsychotic. Um, and Vyvanse is the amphetamine that I take for ADHD.
Right. I take an amphetamine as well. I take Adderall XR. I started
Hmm.
taking it about a year ago because I noticed that all of these different medications that I'm on, I actually also take Lamictal. I'm currently on Lamictal, Buspirone, Vraylar, and then I take Klonopin as needed, and I take Adderall XR as needed. And anyway, the reason I started the Adderall was because I noticed that a lot of these medications I was on seemed to be causing brain fog,
Hmm.
which for the audience, it's like a lack of focus. It's not being able to concentrate well, not retaining information as well as you normally would. And I finally got one of my psychiatrists, or the psychiatrist who I was working with at the time, to add that to my cocktail of medications, and it's worked pretty well. Like I think back to when I wasn't on an amphetamine medication, and I'm like, oh wow, that was really what that was like, because that
Mhm.
sucked. Like I
Yeah,
had no energy, I couldn't concentrate, things were all sorts of messed up.
yeah, yeah. I made, I got diagnosed when I was 21, and I changed medications, and I was on lithium and Zyprexa, Abilify, Lamictal, Klonopin. I would take every night too, and it just wrecked my memory and motivation. I didn't start taking the amphetamine until 2007. So college was very difficult for me. In the end, I graduated after 9 years, but had like 3 or 4 sophomore years of college, because medication changes were very difficult to
Wow.
sustain, while you're trying to retain any information, let alone wake up for school. Just a very difficult experience being a college student with you're changing schedules, shifting schedules, and priorities all the time when you need to have stability. So that's something that I
Yeah.
took away. It's like, yeah, if someone's in college and they're going through this condition and getting on medication, they need to have like, regular classes at the same times. Get yourself a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and show
Mhm.
up at the same time every day. But in the
Yeah.
afternoon, not in the morning, because you're going to sleep through it.
Yeah, having that structure is important. And I feel like college is such a strange time for bipolar people who do
Yeah.
attend university and things like that. Because around that, like 18 to 22-year-old time frame is when symptoms of bipolar disorder and lots of other mental illnesses start to manifest for a lot of people. Not all the time, but like that's kind of typically what they're looking at during that time frame. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of people, a lot of college kids, myself included, back when I was in school, needed to be medicated for things, but weren't, just because they didn't know of the resources that were available, or
Yep.
they thought that they didn't have a problem. Or in my case, you sort of know there's a problem, but I was self-medicating with the drugs and alcohol instead of working with an actual licensed doctor who perhaps could have intervened and prevented a lot of the trials and tribulations that I ultimately ran into
Hmm.
because of
Exactly.
that.
It's sad because people end up self-medicating because they don't know that the medication exists to fix the challenges they're
Right.
feeling.
Well, one of the other things for me is I had a really big stigma against psychotropic medication for a long time, because I would listen to people like Joe Rogan
Mm.
back in the day when I still listened to his podcast in the early years. And they would always talk about like, oh, well, if you take a mood stabilizer or an antidepressant, it's going to change your personality and you're no longer ever going to be yourself again, and it causes all these crazy things. And it's like, well, yeah, it's a psychotropic medication, so it will impact your neurology, but it's going to impact it in a way that prevents you from ending up getting arrested or killing
Mhm.
yourself potentially. So
Yeah.
I was aware that those medications were out there. I was afraid to use them. I didn't want to use them, and I didn't seek out help for a really long time. I was actually initially forced to see a psychiatrist by my parents right after I moved back in with them after college, because they realized, oh no, like Hunter is completely off the rails. Like he needs to be talking to a psychiatrist. And then at that point, I got formally diagnosed as bipolar type 1, and things continued going south. And just a few months later, I found myself civilly committed in a psychiatric hospital, which a little bit different than an involuntary hospitalization, but they can be thought of in a very similar way. So like you were saying earlier in the episode, I also had to like talk to a lawyer and like meet with a judge and stuff after I got brought in by police, and it was just like a complete train wreck.
Yeah. It's 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 such a departure from what you from normal life, to all of a sudden lose your freedom because someone else, it seems like someone else decided that you're not well, right? At least when you're in psychosis, it seemed like that to me. Um, I'd never been locked up before, never been arrested, but having that experience and having had it since then, it's just, it's like, especially when I didn't do anything to deserve it. It's not like I did something wrong, but now here I am
Yeah.
getting locked up again. I
Hmm.
took that is, especially when you're taking medicine as prescribed, it's so frustrating to feel like, why is this happening again?
Yeah, getting locked down. It feels very punitive in a way, like you're being
Yeah,
punished for something.
exactly. So can we punish the doctors that make the mistakes? Is that possible?
File some malpractice suits or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How do we hold them accountable?
it's tricky. Yeah. And then, those doctors who are actually working on the psych wards, the psychiatrists who are on the psych wards in the hospitals are like fucking useless in my own experience. Like they don't give a fuck. They're going to put you on whatever the standard medication that they put every other agitated bipolar person on. And they'll say, all right, take this and let you out in a few days. And
Yeah.
it's like it's just not very moralizing. It's not a good situation to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard with the doctors because there are lots of good doctors. I mean, they obviously like got into
Oh
this
yeah.
field for good reason. They were vetted to get through it, all the training and such, and to have their own practice, etc. But um, I don't know how it's even remotely possible for them to interpret what's going on with a person that they've just met or know very, very limited amount, have
Hmm.
known for a very limited amount of time in 15-minute windows.
Yeah.
Like you can see me for 15 minutes and you're going to change my neurology with a pill.
Yeah,
Cool.
and I think people don't realize that. It's like, I think a lot of neurotypical people, the average person, would think that if you're in a psychiatric hospital, it would be like 24/7, like working with doctors, working with therapists, working with nurses. And it really isn't that way. It's like you're sitting around for however long of an amount of period that you're supposed to be there for, and you really do, just like you said, you talk to a doctor for like 15 minutes total, maybe the entire time that you're there. And they reach a very quick judgment on what they think you need to be prescribed just to get you to mellow out and hopefully get back to baseline quickly. And it's I don't know, man. I feel like it's a total grift. I just think it's a scam in our society because
Mhm.
they charge you what, like anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 a day to be in there, and then the
Yeah.
patient is financially liable for that regardless of if they wanted to go in or not. And that's something that has
Mm.
never sat well with me either.
That's crazy. Yeah, I've been blessed to have insurance when I've been hospitalized. Um, I haven't had to deal with paying out of pocket except for I had one forced hospitalization in Florida a couple of years ago. Um, and that was a mess. That was those people, the
uh,
Floridians.
oh yeah, mental health care in Florida is not that great, it sounds like you're
Um,
saying.
well, like I got hospitalized. I got taken to the hospital by the sheriff or the deputies. Um,
Right.
and then I got hospitalized for 5 days. I got Baker acted, which is like a mandatory 5 day stay. And then
Okay.
I got discharged. But no one told me that I had charges pending. Like no one
What?
told me. So I do a background search on myself about a year later when I'm interviewing, finally recovered. And I'm like, the hell is this? I'm
Like
like
being for
wanted.
like interviewing for a job is when you
Yeah,
came across
yeah,
what?
yeah.
So
So
you had
I had no one ever told me that I had charges pending. They're like, and so I called the police department in Florida, and they were like, "Yeah, you need to come turn yourself in, man." I'm like,
yeah,
what are you
like
talking about?
you've been on the lam, dude, get down here.
Yeah,
Oh
they're like,
my
"Well, you better not
God.
get pulled over when you get here, or else you're going to jail." I'm like, "What did I? I was sick.
What were the
That's what happened to me.
charges? What happened?
Disorderly conduct and resisting arrest nonviolently."
Oh my God. So what ultimately happened with that? Did you like pay a fine? Did you have to do jail time? Like,
No,
how did that pan out?
I had a lawyer negotiated down the probation, and to me, and I was still a massive exception to this. Like probation, I was sick. Why am I getting penalized for this? I shouldn't have to do
Yeah.
anything. Get the whole thing dismissed, you know?
You were brought
But
to a hospital and got the treatment that society thought that you needed. Why would you also
yeah,
have criminal charges on top of that?
exactly. You know?
It's
So
wild.
anyway, it's just it got dismissed. It actually happened right as COVID was going
Oh
on.
my
So I was on
God.
probation and stuff during COVID.
Did that
So
make it a little
great
easier
story.
since you weren't able to go outside or do anything cool?
I mean, I guess yes. But at that time, I was just, the medication wasn't right for me. It wasn't going well for me yet, and I was really anxious. So thankful, very grateful for Seroquel and the changes that I made to that during that time because it calmed me down tremendously. I was so afraid of going to jail. I
Yeah,
was really scared. I didn't
yeah,
want to deal with any of this stuff. I just wanted to get back to work. That's all I wanted to do.
right. So, talk to me a little bit about work. One of the reasons that I invited you on is because I know that you're super, super passionate about workplace discrimination issues against people with mental illness. And I know that over the last year or so, that's something that's really been kind of ramping up for you.
Hmm.
What would you like to speak to those points at all? Because,
Yeah, I
like we were
can
saying
talk a
earlier,
little about that.
it's like when people think of mentally ill people, they probably don't imagine, oh, well, this person has a white collar job and
Hmm.
is working and contributing to society in a huge way.
Yeah, yeah. This is a good topic. We probably would end up going really deep into it, but yeah, I can give you a little bit of teaser. How about that?
Okay.
I only say that because we're getting late in my evening now, and I don't want to wake up hypomanic tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, if you have anything that you want to share before we wrap up, absolutely go for it.
Sure. Yeah, but I'm lucky. I work in tech, but I did see as I was working um, these last couple of years at one of the larger firms out here in Virginia, that there weren't a lot of people like me. I didn't find folks that felt like they were neurodivergent or identified and disclosed as such. So I was really just kind of ostracized and treated like an oddball, it seemed. So I thought, you know what? Like, maybe this is the problem. Maybe the reason why systemic ableism exists is because the people that, and people that struggle with disabilities aren't the ones that get to make and design the products and services that we end up having to consume and use. So I thought, wouldn't that be cool if someone would make an incubator, like an innovation lab for the neurodivergent? And I went off on this like huge exploration, while manic, of what it would take to do that. And it came back to it, thinking, well, this seems like it's an opportunity, and finding that a lot of companies in tech and big industry are finally coming full circle and realizing, yeah, we need to get some of these folks who are neurodivergent, they mean autistic, into some
Hmm.
roles to help us as analysts. And my whole position is like, well, maybe it's not just that we should be subordinate analysts to some other agenda or some other initiative, but perhaps we should be the ones leading the projects and showing you where to shine the light.
Right.
So that's my whole thing is like, it's um, there should like just because you have a disability shouldn't mean that you can't be in a leadership position. In fact, the reality is these people who are underrepresented in leadership from any minority group are what organizations are who the people that organizations need to be leading. Otherwise, they're going to end up creating the same sort of problems over and over again. So that's something that I advocate for. It's like, how do we get more people who are disabled into leadership and decision making positions? Because I think that's critical for folks to be in the workforce, to like realize that they don't have to be to feel like they're not fulfilled or employed at their skill level, and don't have they wouldn't have their couldn't have the potential in a large organization to step into a more job scope. So those are things that I try to advocate for, and try to um, try to be a leader myself so that I can inspire others to do the same.
Yeah. So do you try to be like very vocal about your disability in the workplace, or
Yeah,
do you keep it so
I
you don't
disclose.
have
I
any
think it's important.
problem?
No, no, I don't. I disclose. I think it's important because it's who I am. The diagnosis is a diagnosis, right? Like it's a medical term. But this thing about me that makes me have these cyclical moods, and is the same thing that shows me other insights and dots to connect that other people don't see. So it's hard for me to disambiguate this medical disorder from my lived experience. So for me, when I describe myself as bipolar, I'm telling someone about myself, and so I want them to know. And also, I've read research that says that specifically in the autistic community, that when you do disclose your diagnosis, it helps people understand you better and be more willing to connect with you. So I found that disclosing has helped me find people that are sympathetic, other people with disabilities, and also help me weed out the people that are not. I might as well just use it as a filtering mechanism.
So you've mentioned autism a couple of times. Are you on an autism spectrum, or are you just using that as a point of reference for like other research that's been conducted about mental health?
Yeah, it's a good
Topics?
question. So haven't been diagnosed with as being on the spectrum. I do have severe ADHD, and I think the reason why I call myself neurodivergent is because my ADHD is significant, and I think it's a huge part of my identity too. I understand that ADHD is another highly comorbid condition. Actually, it's like the most comorbid condition with anything else, as I understood.
Yeah.
But it is one of the ones that they use that is um, I'm losing my train of thought here because I'm getting tired. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're doing great.
But the paradigm of neurodiversity lets or includes ADHD as an expression of neurodivergence. I read something recently, actually, on this cool blog in Patreon. This autistic researcher, I don't know her name, but she goes by Trauma Geek,
Okay.
and she called attention to like the different kinds of neurodivergence, and she put bipolar disorder as one that's like caused by trauma. So she put it aside to say like this is this kind, and then autism and ADHD and other conditions or diagnoses or lived experiences are innate to who the person is. And that's something that I sensed. I always wondered, am I neurodivergent because I'm bipolar? I definitely know that I'm different. There's something about me that's different, palpably, interpersonally, and I detect it, and others do too. But is it the bipolar disorder that makes me as such? I really identify with that diagnosis. But maybe it's the ADHD that does. And so that's something. These are two qualifiers, and to me, they just mean that my neurology just varies from other people's, and it's not equally important and part of the human genome. So I shouldn't feel ashamed of it.
Right.
But I reference the autistic community because the paradigm of neurodiversity was it originated from an autistic researcher, as I understand, or the theory did, and it's
Interesting.
something that's embraced fully by, or more embraced, or first embraced by the autistic community before others.
That's really interesting. Well, I know you said you're getting tired. It is getting a little late where we're at right now. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would like to mention before we wrap up? Or did you have anything else that you felt like we might have glossed over, or any final thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I'll offer is, I do have a blog that I'm still building, but if anyone wanted to see or read any more of these sort of rants and tangents that I go on sometimes, you're welcome to check me out at bipolarist.com.
Yeah, bipolarist.com. And I will put that in the episode description as well, so people can check that out if they would like to. Does that mostly focus on neurodivergence in the workplace, or is it kind of just like a general blog that you run? Or
Yeah, so it's a blog I'm building. It's, I intended it to be focused on deshrouding the stigma around bipolar disorder. But I see now there's so many opportunities for us to reinterpret, bipolar disorder and other conditions through this lens and frame of neurodiversity, and the intersections between those folks with diagnoses or these different lived experiences in systems like in the workforce are really interesting, because you see how someone with a different perspective is running into a problem because of some accident. And that accident meaning like the ableist train run off the rails, or a runaway ableist train has been created because people don't really know any better, and it's like, I see some of the challenges I face in the workplace as just accidents, accidents of ignorance. So, I think people are overall very humane and want to be more supportive and more conscientious and sympathetic in the workplace. So those are topics that I do want to explore. But overall, I just think that I'm really fascinated by the concept of neurodiversity. I'm learning a lot more about it every day,
Cool.
and I hope that other people will take interest in it, because I think it ends up informing a lot more connection between people, whether they be quote unquote neurotypical or divergent. I think it just helps us understand that everyone's body is different, and that's okay, and everyone belongs here. Those are ideas I think that are really worth spreading.
That sounds like some really awesome content. So that is on bipolarist.com. Again, I'll put that in the episode description. And Jeff, thank you so much for speaking with me tonight. I think this has been a phenomenal conversation. I feel like I definitely learned a lot. And I think that it'll be really informative for a wider audience too. So I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's been awesome having you on, and I really appreciate your time.
Hunter, thank you for the invite. Oops, my alarm's went off. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience. So thanks, man. This is it's flattering to be invited on a show like this, so I appreciate it.
I hope you all enjoyed listening to that. We had a lot of fun when we were recording that episode, and we were both laughing about it after we ended the recording, because it went in a lot of different directions, and I think we both ended up discussing some things that we weren't initially planning on, but that's okay. That's the beauty of doing a long form, extended format sort of show. So this was another episode of Bipolar Recorder. If you would like to support the show, please visit our website at bipolarrecorder.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Bipolar Recorder. I'm also on Twitter at HHKeegan. As always, thanks so much for listening. Bipolar Recorder is a listener-supported show. To help keep the show running, consider checking out our Patreon page or visiting bipolarrecorder.com to support via PayPal.
Unless otherwise stated, the hosts and guests on Bipolar Recorder are not licensed mental health professionals. Bipolar Recorder is not a substitute for therapy or professional medical intervention. If you are having a mental health crisis, please contact your local emergency services.